Coming up in our newscast tonight. After South Korea's cultural delegation held a meeting with its northern counterparts, it's decided a 160-member troop will cross over at the end of March for 2 performances. Some details of the government's proposed amendment to the Constitution are revealed. They include expanding direct democracy, guaranteeing freedom, safety, and quality of life. Seoul and Washington resumed their annual joint military drills, which were delayed due to the Olympics and Paralympics. But unlike past years, the exercises will take place on a different scale and intensity. NEWSCENTER begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, coming to you live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Che. The two Koreas wrapped up talks today about a concert in the north by a group of performers from Seoul. The two sides agreed on the format and set the date for early next month. It'll be the first time in over a decade for South Korean artists to perform in Pyongyang. Hwon Jang-ho has our top story.
After meeting with representatives from North Korea, singer and composer Yoon Sang confirmed that the two sides agreed on the South Korean pop concerts that will be held in Pyongyang.
The South will send an art troupe to the North made up of 160 members. The artists will stay in Pyongyang from March 31st to April 3rd and put on 2 concerts at the East Pyongyang Grand Theater and the Pyongyang Arena.
Also announced was the list of artists who have accepted the invitation to perform and who have been approved by North Korea. They include pop legends such as Jo Young-pil and Lee Sunny, as well as current K-pop artists such as the female idol group Red Velvet. The first concert will feature South Korean artists, while the second will have collaborations with North Korean performers. The two sides also agreed on an advance team coming from the South to inspect the venues. They will leave on Thursday for a 3-day trip to check the facilities, accommodation and travel route. For any further preparatory arrangements, the two sides agreed to continue discussions via the Panmunjom communications channel. Despite being the first non-government official to head such talks with North Korea, Yoon said they went smoothly. However, he added that with only 11 days till they leave for Pyongyang, they have much to prepare, including a final song list.
It would have been nice to agree upon the song list today, but there were some difficulties in negotiating the songs we wanted and the ones they wanted. I wouldn't say it was political, but more because there were many songs they did not know.
Seoul will be hoping the concert carries on the current positive mood between the two Koreas ahead of the landmark summit between President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, which takes place later in April. Hwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Seoul and Washington's annual joint military drills were postponed to honor the Olympic spirit. The new timetable for the regularly scheduled combined exercises is announced, and it's expected to be different from previous versions, possibly in light of the upcoming summits. Woo Jung-hee explains further.
South Korea military authorities announced the schedule of the delayed Seoul-Washington joint military drills on Tuesday.
Defense chiefs of South Korea and the U.S. agreed to resume the annual combined exercises, including this year's Key Resolve drill, the schedules of which are delayed considering the Olympic spirit. The exercises will begin on April 1st and be at a similar level to previous years.
This year's drills are shorter than in previous years. The Key Resolve, a computerized simulation exercise, is to be held for about 2 weeks starting mid-April, the same length as last year's. But the Full Eagle, which involves the deployment of troops and military equipment, will last 4 weeks starting April 1st, half the length of last year's drill. Seoul has notified Pyongyang of the drill schedule through its Western military communication line. It's also highly likely that the drills will be held at a lower intensity. Whether U.S. strategic assets like nuclear-powered submarines or aircraft carriers participate in the exercises generally determines how intense the drills will be. South Korea's defense ministry didn't specify further on that matter, only saying that South Korea and the U.S. are currently discussing the matter. But according to reports, the drills may not involve B-1B bombers or nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. This is viewed as an attempt to avoid irritating North Korea ahead of inter-Korean talks and Washington-Pyongyang talks planned over the next 2 months. Seoul's defense ministry stressed that the drills are only to safeguard the nation's defense. The Pentagon also underscored Seoul's stance by saying the combined exercises are defense-oriented as they have been for many decades. There is a possibility that both drills could overlap with the inter-Korean summit talks slated for late April, depending on the actual date of the talks. But South Korea's military authorities say the drills will be held just as planned, regardless of the talks. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Over in Finland, an unofficial two-day meeting of government figures and experts from Seoul, Washington, and Pyongyang was held. The participants had their first dinner together ahead of in-depth discussions on various subjects, including the upcoming historic summits. Park Ji-won zooms in on the prelude to the so-called Track 1.5 event.
The officials and experts meeting for the so-called Track 1.5 talks held their first official dinner Monday evening in Finland's capital Helsinki. Starting Tuesday, the 18 representatives, 6 from each country, will have 2 days of closed-door discussions on various issues, including the terms and conditions for the North's denuclearization and the upcoming Inter-Korean Summit and U.S.-North Korea Summit. The list of attendees includes South Korean security experts, Pyongyang's Deputy Director General for North American Affairs Choi Kang-il, and the former U.S. Ambassador to South Korea Kathleen Stevens. While preparations for the upcoming summit talks are underway, the New York Times, quoting several officials, reported that the Central Intelligence Agency is taking a primary role in orchestrating the meeting, with the U.S. State Department having a rather diminished role. Although outgoing Secretary of State Rex Tillerson will remain at his post until the end of the month, until CIA Director Mike Pompeo replaces him, the paper said the U.S. intelligence agency is already in charge of some back-channel communications between the U.S. and North Korea. Meanwhile, South Korea's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa has been discussing the North Korean issue with top diplomats from the European Union. Speaking at the EU Foreign Affairs Council's meeting in Brussels on Monday, Kang explained the situation on the Korean peninsula, asking for the EU's continued support and cooperation in establishing peace and stability in the region. The South Korean Foreign Ministry said the EU invited Kang to attend at the monthly meeting of foreign ministers of the EU countries, and it was the first time a South Korean foreign minister has attended the meeting. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
With us, and I think it is the joint.
South Korea's presidential office has started disclosing the contents of the government-proposed bill on revising the nation's constitution. Our Hwang Ho-jun was at Cheongwade for the announcement that provides a glimpse of the direction the Moon Jae-in administration is going with the amendment.
Initial impressions are that the government's proposal for the constitutional amendment will articulate the nation's identity as a democracy and put more emphasis on human rights. Reporters were briefed on Tuesday morning by 3 Blue House officials, including the senior presidential secretary for civil affairs, on the proposed preamble to the Constitution and matters related to basic rights as well as popular sovereignty.
First and foremost, I make it clear that the people should be the center of the constitutional revision. The Republic of Korea that the people desire is a country that guarantees the people's freedom, safety, and the minimum quality of life as a human being.
The current preamble to the Constitution underscores that the nation upholds the democratic ideals of the April 19th Revolution of 1960, in which people protested against electoral corruption. The Moon administration has decided to add other democratic movements to the nation's constitutional framework, including the Busan Masan protests of 1979, the Gwangju democratization movement of the following year, and the June 10th democracy movement in the late 80s. The government's proposal also expands the scope of inalienable basic rights not only to Korean citizens but to all humankind. According to the Blue House, this reflects the international community's expectations and the fact that there are more than 2 million foreign nationals living in Korea. Social rights such as education, however, will still be limited to Korean citizens. The Blue House also wants to include the people's right to life and the right to live safely, meaning that the government must protect the people from disasters. That's apparently a reflection of recent tragedies, including the sinking of the Seoul ferry, which killed more than 300 high school students. The government also seeks to reinforce popular sovereignty by adding the people's right to recall elected officials and representatives, and also allowing people to directly propose legislation. This would be the first time the Korean constitution has specified such powers for the people.
By expanding the system of direct democracy on such a large scale, I believe it will complement the existing representative system and greatly contribute to the development of democracy.
And the Blue House will reveal more of the proposal. Wednesday will cover decentralization, and on Thursday it will be the rights and privileges of constitutional institutions, including the form of government. The Blue House will prepare the bill for submission on March 26. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Over in Parliament, opposition parties view the president's push for constitutional revision as an opportunistic strategy to win the June local elections. Brushing off such claims is the ruling bloc, which called on other parties to come together and craft a proposal of their own. Kim Min-ji has the latest from the National Assembly.
The ruling Democratic Party of Korea called on the main opposition Liberty Korea Party to work sincerely toward crafting a constitutional revision in Parliament. The party said the fact that President Moon Jae-in has postponed the submission date of the government's version from this Wednesday to next Monday shows his willingness to leave the revision up to the National Assembly. It went on to say that the main opposition has no justification for opposing a referendum being held alongside the local elections in June.
The Liberty Korea Party doesn't seem to be interested in what the people want. Polls show that what the people want is revision. On top of that, going back over a year, there's been enough discussion of the matter in Parliament, so there's no reason to delay it.
The main opposition, however, dug in its heels, claiming the president and the ruling party are trying to use the referendum to win this summer's local elections. The party claimed further that the government's proposal won't pass the National Assembly anyway. In fact, the proposal would need support from 2/3 of the parliament's 293 lawmakers, but the Liberty Korea Party holds 116 seats, enough to block it. The Conservative Party has been against the idea of holding a referendum in tandem with the elections, saying it would politicize the issue. There's also the matter of how the constitution should be changed to reduce the presidential powers. The main opposition disagrees with the government's approach and insists that the way to go is to give more authority to a prime minister picked by the legislature.
We will not take part in a parliamentary vote on the government's proposal. Any lawmaker that does will be expelled from the party. The government's pressing ahead with its proposal is an attempt to label us as anti-revision.
The centrist Bareunmirae Party also said that they can't help but think that the government's preferred timing for a referendum is an attempt to win election votes. But at the same time, the party acknowledged that it shows that the National Assembly hasn't done its part and called on parties to come together to swiftly draw up a roadmap. The government is seen as trying to up the pressure on the National Assembly, but there's a lot that has to be done if a referendum is to be held in June, with lawmakers still having to come to an agreement on both the timing and content. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories now, President Moon Jae-in and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau agreed to work together in fighting trade protectionism. During a 40-minute phone on Tuesday morning local time, the two leaders shared concerns on the recent developments and highlighted the importance of upholding the rules-based global trading system, noting both nations are highly dependent on trade. The joint call for free trade comes as Washington moves to impose a 25% tariff on steel imports. Trudeau said although Canada had been granted a temporary waiver on the import tariffs, he does not believe trade issues involving the United States have been resolved yet and vowed to raise the issue at the Group of Seven summit in June. South Korea's producer prices for the month of February hit their highest level in 3 years. Agricultural and fisheries goods are the key driving factors. Kim Hye-sung breaks down the digits for us.
South Korea's producer prices rose for the second month in a row in February. The Bank of Korea says last month's producer price index, a barometer of future consumer inflation, reached 103.99, up 0.4% compared to the previous month and 1.3% on year. The index is at its highest point since November 2014. Agricultural and fishery products prices surged 5.7% on month, hitting a high not seen since August 2016. Prices of agricultural goods spiked more than 9% on month, led by rising prices of goods like white, reddish, and green chili peppers. Prices of livestock also rose around 4%, with chicken prices soaring 17.5% on month.
Cold weather and soaring demand during the Lunar New Year holiday led to a surge in agriculture and livestock product prices in February. Producer price is a leading indicator of consumer prices, with around a 2 to 3 months difference, but the demand-side pressure on industrial goods prices is not high, so the overall pressure on consumer prices is expected to be fairly low.
Prices of industrial goods rose slightly by 0.2% as chemicals climbed 0.8% from a month earlier. Prices of services edged up 0.1%. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
The Korea Development Institute, along with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, is holding a special seminar focused on improving the use of public-private partnerships, or PPP, around the world. The term refers to private sector helping to provide public services or run construction projects on behalf of the government. At the three-day event, the two organizations will share their experiences of PPPs in Korea and abroad, hoping to come up with the best practices that can be adopted by transitioning economies.
For countries that may need for the first time to set up institutions to help build public-private partnerships, to not doing it from scratch.
The joint project will produce a report and video materials that summarize the best practices and lessons learned from PPP cases from various parts of the globe by July. The arrest warrant for Lee Myung-bak will be reviewed Thursday, but the former president accused of corruption will not be present at the session. Lee claims to have explained himself fully in last week's interrogation. Park Hee-jun has the full story.
The Seoul Central District Court said Tuesday that it'll hold a hearing on Thursday at 10:30 a.m. to review whether to issue an arrest warrant for ex-President Lee Myung-bak. But Lee Myung-bak himself will not be attending the hearing. Only prosecutors and his lawyers will be going. Lee said through his staff that there is no need to go, since he already explained himself during last week's marathon interrogation. If he doesn't appear, the court will have to decide without further hearings, but instead by going over the interrogation records and other evidence from the investigation. He was president of South Korea from 2008 to 2013, and he's suspected of accepting bribes worth around $10 million. He's also accused of using false names to conceal his ownership of the auto parts company DAS, which he allegedly used to accumulate slush funds worth nearly $30 million. The former president has been denying almost all of the allegations, but considering the gravity of the charges and the possibility that he could destroy evidence, the prosecution explained that there was no option but to seek his arrest. The court is expected to decide as soon as Thursday night whether to issue the warrant. And if it does, Lee Myung-bak will be the fourth former South Korean leader to face arrest for corruption. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
Elsewhere around the world, a fatal accident in Arizona prompts Uber to suspend its self-driving car tests in the United States. This is reportedly the first time a pedestrian is killed by an autonomous vehicle, sparking further fears of that technology. For details, let's turn to our Nuaram.
Sunday's accident could deal a huge blow to not only Uber's long-term business model and strategy, but the general idea of having self-driving cars out on public roads. Uber has consistently touted that its driverless cars are safer than vehicles driven by humans. But autonomous cars have been prone to accidents, with some being caught running red lights and others even colliding with other traffic. But now that a pedestrian has been killed, the technology has once again come under fire. Police said the Volvo was in self-driving mode with a supervisor behind the wheel when the 49-year-old woman, identified as Elaine Hertzberg, was hit. She later died in hospital. Uber expressed its condolences on Twitter, adding it is fully cooperating in the investigation. The issue has also raised questions about legislation related to autonomous driving, especially amid a fierce battle between car makers to master the technology. In the U.S., the federal government has voluntary guidelines for companies that want to test autonomous vehicles, leaving much of the regulation up to states. Although there has been a gradual increase in legislation, many are still wary of the technology. Sunday's incident will only add to those fears and will likely spark significant calls for reform and reflections within the industry. Noaram, Arirang News.
Movers and shakers, the bigwigs and the up-and-comers of the industry, as well as those who understand the term one day you're in, the next day you're out, are gathering under one roof to celebrate fashion in all its glitz and glamour. Local designers finally get to showcase what they've been preparing for months, hoping to get their name out to the world. Our Lee Jung-yeon takes us to this year's Seoul Fashion Week.
Denim on denim, pink shorts in winter, retro haircuts and belts for necklaces. Anything and everything is welcome here at the 2018 Fall-Winter Hera Seoul Fashion Week. The heavy influence of street fashion in Korean pop culture, as well as ready-to-wear clothing that's made to standard size to fit the general public, seems to be what's drawing the big names to the Korean fashion scene this year.
I think the Korean designers have a very distinct point of view. I mean, there's a whole, visual, verbal kind of dialogue that's happening here that we don't see anywhere else. So it's a really great time to be in this Korean market.
I would like to see very street. We need a new designer that goes in that direction, and it's something that it works really well in the markets.
Some 90 emerging designers are showcasing their collections to an international audience of around 300 foreign buyers and the press, with some 37 top local brands also taking part.
I just came back from a New York show, but as a Korean, it's a huge honor to showcase my work through Seoul Fashion Week, and it's a must-do for a Korean designer aiming to step out onto the international stage.
The opening day kicked off with the event's first ever hanbok fashion show, a collection by top-tier hanbok designer Kim Hae-sun. It's not the norm to feature traditional wear on the runway in fashion weeks, but this is something the director has been planning for a long time.
Every year we have hundreds of foreigners coming to the show. Although it's important to show them the modern Korean style, I think showing something traditional is more important.
Jazz band Prelude joined up with Lee Hee-moon, the lead vocalist of Sing Sing, a band that combines rock and Korean folk music, to add some cultural fusion to the opening event. The 2018 Fall-Winter Hera Seoul Fashion Week will run until March 24th at the Dongdaemun Design Plaza in Seoul. Lee Jung-yeon, Arirang News.
Time now to turn to our Myung-bak at the Weather Center for the updates you need. Michelle, it's been cold all day. I thought winter was gone by now, but it seems like tomorrow we will have to bundle up even more.
That's right, Daniel. Now, as you said, winter might be gone, but winter-like conditions are back with strong winds that are most likely to bring in some precipitation. Now, the wind caused a lot of damage in various regions today, including Busan, where some of the windows are even shattered. Now, a strong wind alert has been issued along the east and the southern coast, so be aware. Now, once this easterly wind passes through, the rain clouds will bring some precipitation on the nation, starting in the southern regions tonight. But due to the low temperatures, the precipitation could be either rain or snow or even both at different times. And in the mornings, Seoul wakes up to 1 degree Celsius, Daegu and Busan hits to 2 and 3 degrees respectively. And low temperatures will dominate tomorrow, with Seoul just rising up to 7 degrees, while Gwangju and Busan peaking up to 4 and 6 degrees. Now hang on just a little longer, because by the time we reach Thursday afternoon, the daily highs will return to the mild side, with conditions becoming optimal to go on a long-awaited picnic. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we have for you on tonight's edition of Arirang News Center, wherever you may be tuning in from. Thank you for staying with us.